Eventually, you'll need to insert test data at the beginning of your scenarios. And that's when things get tricky, so let's learn to do this right. First, never assume that there is data in the database at the beginning of a scenario. Instead, you should put any data you need there intentionally with a given. Go to the top of this scenario and add, given there is an admin user admin with password admin. I'm inventing this language. It describes something that needs to be set up using natural language. Change the given line below this to and for readability. Okay, run it again. It should print out the step definition for this new language. And it does. Copy that and put it into our feature context class. Change arg1 to username and arg2 to password. Update the arguments to match. To fill this in, we want to insert a new user in the database with this username and password. If Symfony were loaded, that would be really easy. I'd create a user object, set some data on it, then persist and flush it. So let's do exactly that. Even if you're not using Symfony, you'll use the same basic process to bootstrap your application and get access to all of your normal useful objects and functions. We only need to boot Symfony once at the beginning of the test suite. Afterwards, all of our scenarios will be able to execute Symfony's container. Make a new public function bootstrap Symfony. And inside, we'll do exactly what its name says. We'll need a couple of require statements for autoload.php and the appkernel.php class. Then, it's as easy as kernel equals new appkernel. Pass it the environment, test, and the debug value true so we can see errors. Finish with kernel arrow boot. Congrats, you just bootstrapped your Symfony app. What we really want is access to the service container. To get that, create a new private static container property. Then in the method, set this with self::container equals kernel arrow get container. Now, as long as we call bootstrap Symfony first, we'll have access to the container. Oh, and update this method to be a public static function. I'm making this all static because it allows us to have one container across all of our different scenarios. Because remember, each scenario gets its own context instance. We could call this method manually, but that's not fancy enough. Remember the hook system? We used @before scenario and @after scenario before, but there are other hooks like @before suite, so let's use that. Bhat will call this method one time, even if we're testing 10 features and 100 scenarios. Inside of the there is an admin user with password function, let's go to work. I already have a user entity set up in the project, so we can say user equals new user. Then set the username and the plain password. I have a doctrine listener already set up that will encode the password automatically, which is good. It's well known that Raptors can smell unencoded passwords. In this app, to make an admin user, we need to give the user role_admin. Okay, now the moment of truth. We need the entity manager. Cool. So grab it with em equals self::container arrow get doctrine to get the doctrine service, and then arrow get manager. It's easy from here. Em arrow persist user and em flush. And that should do it. We already have a user called admin in the database, so let's test this using admin2. Give it a go. This should not work since the user isn't in the database yet, unless it's created by the code we just wrote. Brilliant. This is huge. We're guaranteeing there's an admin2 user by bootstrapping our app and being dangerous with all of our useful services.